All of time and space. Everywhere and anywhere, every star that ever was. Where do you want to start?
Imagine a deserted Piccadilly line. Anyone who's ever commuted into the city from South Ealing will be rejoicing already. But let me stop you there. The London Underground has been abandoned for a very good reason. This month we're looking at one of Doctor Who's stone-cold classics, featuring mind control, big hairy monsters, some squaddy bloke called Alistair who will come to know and love, and a journalist you'll just want to smash in the face. I'm Iain.
And I'm Mark, and welcome to All of Time and Space. Before we meet our very special guest, let's catch up with where we are in the story. For 40 years, the Yeti had been quiet. A collector's item in a museum. Then, without warning, it awoke and savagely murdered. At about the same time, patches of mist began to appear in central London. People who lingered any time in the mist were found dead, their faces smothered in cobwebs. The cobwebs seeped down, penetrating the underground system. Slowly, it spread. Then the Yeti reappeared, not just one, but hordes, roaming the misty streets and cobweb tunnels, killing everyone in their path. Central London was gripped tight in a web of fear. And we'll be back after this.
Some sort of grill.
Oh, don't say you've landed us in a prison.
Could be the dungeons of a castle.
So dark.
Ah, steps. Come on, be careful. Yes. This large room. Tiled walls. Curved ceiling. Come on.
The floor seems to end here. It's a sort of trench. Look.
Hey, Doctor, come and look at this.
What have you found, Victoria?
See for yourself.
Covent Garden. Oh, yes, of course. It's an underground station. We're standing on the platform.
Underground station?
Trains, underground trains. A little after your time, I think, Victoria.
Is it always as dark as this?
No. It's probably the middle of the night. Come along, let's go up top a bit. Lots of life up there. Funny, isn't it? What? How we keep on landing on your Earth.
And welcome back, and we are joined by the wonderful Toby Hadoke. Hello, Toby.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for agreeing to come on. What a coup, getting Toby Hadoke on the podcast.
Oh, I don't know, I'm a bit like the Michael Sheard of the podcast.
When you've got an unconvincing moustache.
I just say yes to everything, me.
Well, you might come to regret that, Toby, because, Iain, it's time.
It's that time already, isn't it? Yes, Toby, it's time for you to face the Mind Probe.
No, not the Mind Probe.
No, not the Mind Probe.
Oh,
Textbook, that was classic.
Yeah.
That was a
Can't
belter.
get better than that.
Let me thrill you with the elaborate preamble. Toby, satisfy the Mind Probe, and you will be returned at the end of this podcast to your customary time and place. But if you should fail in the test, then Castellan Cockram here, why his sweaty palms are literally itching to toss you vigorously into the time lash. Are you ready?
That joke never gets old, does it?
I don't.
Can I say no, not the time lash as well? Not the time lash.
You wouldn't be the first. I think everyone who's ever done a watch through has said that at some point or other. If you're braced and ready, we'll saunter up to the mark and have a look at question number 1.
Okie dokie.
Okay, it's an easy one. Which classic rock band wrote the song "Don't Fear the Reaper"?
What? I thought there was going to be questions about Doctor Who.
It's no.
Oh, I don't know about anything other than Doctor Who. Don't fear the... I've got no idea.
I think what Ian's doing here is he's using specific words from the title of the episode.
Well, no, you see, this is more of a... This is kind of a new thing. I'm kind of freestyling this, so...
Toby, can I... Ian, can you just put your fingers in your ears for a minute?
Yeah.
Toby, it's the Blue Oyster Cult.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway, carry on, Ian. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I've been searching into my memory banks, and I think the Blue Oyster Cult are calling me.
Oh, that was inspired.
Incredible. What
pulled
knowledge.
That out of the ether. Okay, then. Question number 2. My hometown of Colchester in Essex is famous for its oysters. Which Doctor Who stories are set in Colchester?
Ooh.
I don't know. Geography is. I'm geographically blind. I don't know.
Right, I'm just going to fire up the time lash.
Yeah, get it ready. Get the rubber gloves on, and this time make sure they're wet before you. Because do you remember you got that, and that took a lot of cream.
It really did.
Toby, the answer is the lodger, and or closing time.
Okay. Yeah.
Question number 3. In what year did David Bowie release the album Lodger?
Ooh. I know he shares the same birthday as William Hartnell and Elvis Presley, which is the 8th of January.
That's got to be worth a bonus point, surely.
1976.
Oh, it's good, but it's not right.
It's not right.
I feel like that's been said before in a quiz. The answer is 1979. Moving on to question 4.
Ian, you didn't mix up Toby's questions with Nick Pegg's questions, did you?
No.
Oh, okay, just wondering. That's all.
I mean,
Carry on.
Yes, but we'll go with it. In 1979, who was the script editor of the children's BBC show Doctor Who?
In 1979, what Douglas Adams?
How right you are. Oh, this is very exciting now. Question 5. Douglas Adams joined which rock band on stage at Earl's Court in 1994?
No idea.
Well, I was at those gigs. Well, one of them anyway. Not when Douglas was on stage, but Ian, just cover your ears again. Toby, it's Pink Floyd.
Oh, Ian, I think it's the eternally warring Pink Floyd who've been shouting at each other on Twitter recently.
It's great the way
about who Douglas Adams was really friendly with.
Yeah,
it was me, said Roger Waters.
Yeah.
No, it was me, said Dave Gilmour.
It was me and my out-of-date stylings about military. Yeah. Final question then.
I've done really well, haven't I?
Well, you have. It's been incredible. Your wealth of knowledge is quite amazing.
I've got 3 written down. I don't know how you managed to get the Blue Oyster Cult and Pink Floyd, but props to your abilities of deep recall. Final question. In which year did the Metropolitan Police install a police box outside Earl's Court Tube Station?
Toby, you're on your own now, pal.
I've got no idea. I've got no idea. I don't know.
Well, it was 1996.
Oh.
What?
Yes. It's still there now. Yeah, I went to go and see it when I was at uni.
I shared a photo of it earlier on Twitter.
Like a massive loser. But I'm really proud I didn't get that picture where you're like standing in front of the doors doing the...
No, I didn't do that. I took an arty shot of the corner of the police box looking at Earl's Court tube station. In a similar way to the way that one of the greats of Doctor Who direction, like Dougie Campfield, just, off the top of my head, would have lined up that kind of shot.
That's where you'd sort of put yourself if you were directing Doctor Who. You'd be
if I had to,
you and Douglas, you'd be like that. Okay.
I was slightly above Douglas, but
Slightly above Douglas. Well, you heard it here first, listeners. Toby, I'm gonna say that on balance, given that the stakes are very low and no one cares either way, you've passed with flying colours and you win a peanut M&M, which I will mail to you at some point in the future.
I'd say the mind probe's not going to need a very big scoop, is it, to get it out of me?
To be fair, we've blunted it quite severely over the years already, so it's quite a dull weapon now. Speaking of dull weapons, Mark.
Oh, hi. Thanks for that. Yes, well, seeing as we were talking about Dougie Camfield just now, I suppose we really ought to talk about the Web of Fear.
Hooray!
Toby.
Yes.
Can you tell us, please, what your relationship with the Web of Fear is? Where did you first encounter it?
It's a very special story for me because it is the first Target book I ever read. So I'm the youngest of four, so I've got a couple of older brothers. So we had Target books in the house. They were normal, kids who liked Doctor Who and then grew out of it, whereas I sort of grew into it. So there was Doctor Who around the house, and my brothers would even now be able to sort of, they know their Pyramids of Mars from their Seeds of Doom or whatever. But so we've had probably a couple of dozen Target books, and I'd sort of flicked through them, and I'd looked at them, and I'd looked at the pictures, and I'd read the last chapter of Doctor Who and the Silurians because it's very Doctor Who and the Cave Monsters because it's very short. It's only 2 pages. But when I decided to, embark upon my first Target book to just try and crack one of these books, because I was probably I was too young, certainly 7 or 8. I think I'd found the Malcolm Hulk ones a little bit sort of harder to get into, so I'd realised it was going to be a Terrance Dicks that I was going to do, and not one of the Day of the Daleks or the Demons, which were quite small print, and Doctor Who and the Cybermen and all that. So the Web of Fear had an exciting looking cover, and it was the first Target I read, and is is sort of my ground zero of Doctor Who stories. And then, of course, when I started collecting episodes, the first tape I got was all the Orphan Troughton episodes, or most of them, seven Orphan Troughton episodes on a Yashima E180, and that was like I'd come across the Dead Sea Scrolls when I started collecting episodes, and of course it was on there. I'd seen quite a big chunk of that episode though, because Mervyn Bragg had done on the South Bank show. There'd been a documentary about the Tube, but about the Tube in the media, and it was basically it was just a load of clips from different things that the Tube was in, and and it said in the paper, explores the Tube being used in, and it said Doctor Who, so I knew to record it. Unfortunately for me, it was the first clip after Mervyn Bragg's introduction. So I could then tape over stuff after that. So I had that clip, which is from the Doctor and Co leaving the TARDIS to when he says, "Oh yes, of course, it's an underground station. We're standing on the platform." So I knew that bit by heart because I watched it over and over and over again. So then when I got the episode, I was sort of familiar with that bit. But then I watched the episode, and as orphaned episodes go, it's pretty special. And then of course it came back, but I'm sure we'll talk about that.
I'm sure we will. Yeah, I think the show was on a bit of a hiding to nothing because, as you say, that first episode is an absolute belter. So the worry's always there that when these things do get recovered, that it's not going to live up to the quality of the first episode. Ian, I seem to remember you telling us a story about how you were sat on your grandma's kitchen floor reading Web of Fear as a wee nipper.
So it was not only the kitchen floor, which was a sort of weird, sort of dark linoleum with like flecks of blues, and it looked a bit like a star field. But obviously it wasn't. It was a grandmother's kitchen floor. And also her front room, which was carpeted, which is less interesting. But yeah, East London, Manor Park would have been the early 80s. This would have been one of my first, I want to say, 5 or 6 Target books as well. And it was just literally, it was the most exciting thing I'd ever read. And I had only just put down Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, so that's how exciting this truly was. And then my next experience of it, as was previously mentioned, we will come to.
Yes. Well, I had a friend gave me a disc with a whole bunch of audios copied onto them, which is probably very naughty. But I have since bought them all legally, so it's fine. So if you're listening, BBC. And so I'd listened through those, and that was my first sort of experience of it, because I had a few Targets, but I didn't have a massive collection. Don't know whether that was just a personal thing, but so yes, that would have been my first connection with the story. Toby, what do you make of this TARDIS team? Is it up there with some of the best?
The TARDIS, well, Troughton is my favourite Doctor. Although he tussles with Tom Baker. And I love Troughton and Jamie. I have to say it's a difficult one, this, and I must, because I haven't watched a lot of much of season 5 since the 2 that obviously that came back and watched over and over again.
Yeah.
I remember when I did Running Through Corridors, both Rob Shearman and I did struggle a little with Victoria, and it's not Deborah Watling's fault. But she's quite one note and shrill as a character. I mean, I love everything about 60s Doctor Who, and I'm very fond. I'm very fond of everyone involved. But if I was to choose a classic Troughton lineup, I would probably go to others before this triumvirate. If I'm honest.
I think that's fair.
I have a note here from when I was watching episode 4 of this story in my preparation for this, and what I've written down is, it is in this episode that I realise I've finally had enough of Victoria.
Aww.
For the love of God, shut up. And again, nothing to do with the actress. She was just given the Susan Foreman of roles, and
very
thus,
true.
and so. And what do you know?
Yes. I mean, we start the story with, what really should have been the end of the last story, really. I know that back in the 60s, the big thing was that it was a serial, so you'd just finish one story and it would lead into the next story. But it's quite an abrupt end to the last story, and we're left on tenterhooks as to whether the TARDIS team are going to escape being sucked off into the vortex, if you'll pardon the expression.
Well, I feel like that last episode of Enemy was sort of truncated, because I think that maybe the effect didn't quite come off with the 2 Troughtons or whatever. So
I think what we get to see is very good.
Yeah, but I don't know why we needed an extended kind of extra bit in this story when they had a spare 5 minutes to play with last week. But what do I know?
When we didn't have the rest of the story, I remember being quite cross, in the sense that we've got one episode of the Web of Fear, and the first 5 minutes is essentially the enemy of the world. And we go, no, I want to meet the soldiers and all these new characters. If they'd done that quicker, we might have met the Brigadier earlier or whatever. So I remember, simply having it as an artifact that was a representative of the Web of Fear. I was always a bit cross with those first 5 minutes, because it's like, come on, get on.
Or start it a bit earlier so you get to see Salamander at least.
Absolutely.
But yeah. And how do you feel the Yeti work as a monster? Are you a fan of them?
I'm a great big fan of the. I find it difficult not to be a fan of much sort of Doctor Who that was on before I was born, because it was all stuff we would never see, and it was all hallowed and sainted.
Yeah.
I have to say, when we only had episode 1, I wasn't wild about the Yeti redesign. In that I've always rather liked the Abominable Snowman Yeti. I don't buy the cuddly thing, and I found the sort of beaks and the sort of stuck on eyes of these Yeti, especially that shot in Silverstein's. Is it a museum? It's got a lot of candles for a museum, but that doesn't matter.
Yes.
He's got a very casual
he really has, but it's a beautiful sequence. And I remember actually not really liking them when we only had episode 1, but actually when you see them in action and in the rest of the story, and they're nice and big and bulky, I think they're great. I think they look fantastic. But it's I had to sort of get over them, if you like, in a way that I didn't have to get over the first ones. But I'm not very good with change. I'm a Doctor Who fan. It's been downhill since the Cave of Skulls.
Yeah, Doctor Who's not what it used to be, is it? I really like the juxtaposition, because obviously in their previous story, although they are sort of intergalactic robots, it's set in the Himalayas, so you kind of expect to see a Yeti. So this whole thing of having Yeti in the London Underground, and those, we have to mention that the sets were incredible. I mean, Douglas Camfield is an incredible director, but a lot of the credit on this story has to go to those people working on the sets and the costumes as well. It's really impressive.
I mean, David Myerscough-Jones did the set design, and they're an absolute triumph, those underground sets. And I mean, you're right that using the Yeti to inveigle your way into a Himalayan monastery is quite a is quite a good cover. I'm not quite sure of the camouflage possibilities of a Yeti in the London Underground. It does seem an odd one. It's a bit like going, we're gonna invade a school. How should we blend in? We shall all be unicorns. I mean, it's an odd one. But part of Doctor Who's brilliance is juxtaposition. The Yeti on the loo in Tooting Bec, and they look magnificent in those. The lighting is absolutely fantastic.
Really
not just on film. I mean, the film lighting, you've obviously got better opportunities, and the film stock makes it look glorious, as gorgeous as well. But actually, the studio lighting by Clive Leighton is fantastic, and there is a sort of inkiness about it that you don't get in, say, Tomb of the Cybermen, which we were brought up to think of as being sort of dripping with atmosphere, but it's actually quite a grayscale story. Tomb of the Cybermen. Those tombs aren't dark and shadowy in terms of lighting and things, but those underground tunnels are sort of dripping with. You can feel the cold, and you can see the sort of dancing inky shadows, and I think the contrast of the picture is hugely atmospheric.
Yeah, and even when they're out in broad daylight, obviously we're jumping around somewhat, but when we get to the Covent Garden scenes, they're just phenomenal. So good.
When I remember Doctor Who magazine did when they were running out of Doctor Who archives to do, they did one called Nostalgia instead, and I remember that it's saying in that episode 4 is probably the best episode, and you go, because that's the one where most of the sort of supporting cast get killed, and I remember when I watched it for the first time, and I watched it with a friend, and we did everything. We did it in order, and after episode 4, I turned to him, and I was expecting to be a little bit jaded because that's just life and nature. And I looked at him and I said, "That's the best episode of Doctor Who I've ever seen," because of course it was something about it because it had been previously missing, but it's that Covent Garden sequence is. I was expecting to be disappointed just because, again, of the nature of your expectation is always sort of is never met when the cold reality of 1960s television production techniques come in. But it's brilliantly shot by Camfield. It's really exciting. The bit where Corporal Blake, who in the book, because in the script you see that sequence is not described. That sequence is basically the soldiers fight, Blake is killed, the Lethbridge Stewart escapes. I've got the shooting script. That's almost literally what it says. And And so that's all Camfield, and that's why. And bless him, he gives each one of those stuntmen a line, so that each one of them gets something to say and a close-up, which is a really nice thing to do as a director.
It is.
But so in the book, Blake just gets too close to Lethbridge Stewart. Lethbridge Stewart says, "Get away," and he gets shot down by a gun. So that's how I had Corporal Blake's death in my head. He just gets zapped, and in this he gets grabbed by the ankles and pulled off a box and sort of beaten to death off camera as he screams, and it's horrendous and it's really good. And I think episode 4 is absolutely terrific. It's a really good nuts and bolts episode of Doctor Who, and I love it, and it thrills me.
It's like you say, though, you've had 30-odd years, well, in our case anyway, because we're more senior fans, to build up these images in your mind, because you can listen to the soundtracks, and as you say, there's a huge worry that it's not going to live up to it, but right the way through, it's just superb. So it could have just been a straightforward sort of monsters invading, but I think there's a lot more to it than that. You've got the whole intrigue with the obviously we've had people being possessed by the intelligence in the previous story, and that comes back again, and it really keeps you on edge. Obviously we're slightly spoiled because
let me stop you there. So
go on.
like we say, I read the book of this many times in the 80s. I watched it about 10 years ago when it was miraculously put on sale. I still, every time I come to it, I still have no idea who the big bad's going to turn out to be. And all the way through my notes, I've written down, pretty sure it's Chorley. Actually, it might be the old guy who can't act so well. Oh no, it might be Anne Travers, because otherwise what's the point of Anne Travers? So I'm always flitting around from suspect to suspect.
Well, I mean, it's an early spoil for me, because I remember talking to my elder brother, and him saying, "So how are you doing with the book?" I said, "Oh, I'm nearly at the end. I was on like chapter 10 or whatever. I was I was probably in sort of episode 5, story wise
territory."
And he said, and I said, "Oh, and so and so's dead, and there's Harold Chorley, and he's he seems a bit dodgy, and there's Sergeant Arnold, he seems really nice, and blah blah blah." And I said, and anyway, but somebody's a traitor. And my brother said, "Well, you know how you said Sergeant Arnold's really nice." Which, because again, I'm thinking of my older brother being, this towering ancient figure. He was probably like 10, so subtlety was not necessarily his thing. But he was showing off his knowledge in a subtle way. However, this does bring me to the bit of the story that makes me very sad, because in the book, Terrance Dicks has improved it. I think in the book, Sergeant Arnold, when he's not possessed by the intelligence, is just Sergeant Arnold. He doesn't know.
Yeah.
In the serial, they basically say, "Oh, he was one of the first soldiers to die." So the Sergeant Arnold that we have seen in all 6 episodes has been the great intelligence pretending to be Sergeant Arnold. And Jack Woolgar gives such a sort of nice stoical. He's not unlike my granddad and a lot of men of that age, ex-military or ex-NCOs with a moustache and that sort of hair. I mean, he looks actually quite like my granddad, who was also in the army, and is typical of those sorts of, sort of stoical, fairly prosaic, down to earth, doing your duty sort of chaps, and salt of the earth kind of guys, and he does such a good job of that. I don't want him to be the intelligence lying. I much prefer him being nice Sergeant Arnold, who's actually quite nice to the younger ones, especially when they get scared, and he bravely does this and that and the other. And the idea that he's the intelligence lying all the time, and because it's also a bit tragic at the end in the book, because if Jamie hadn't interfered, I think the suggestion is the Doctor could have freed Arnold and he'd have been all right. Yeah. Whereas in this, Arnold's just a walking corpse. Yeah. And so I prefer what Terrance Dicks has done. And I have to say, when I'm watching it, I sort of pretend that's what's happened, even though in actual fact that's not correct. But I lie to myself in order to make it what I prefer, because I prefer that version.
It seems, a shame when you've got Harold Chorley walking around not to leave him as a burnt-out husk at the end of the story.
Oh, he's so good.
You know, it's a way.
He's so good.
He's brilliant, isn't he? He's possibly, for my money, the best one in it, because you dislike him on a molecular level, and that's some powerful acting going on there.
Yeah. I mean, this story is really introducing a lot of stuff that's going to come in not too far down the line now. You've got a sort of a proto-unit set up, and of course you've got a proto-Talfrin Thomas as well.
Ah, yes. Driver Evans, yes.
Yeah. What a performance.
I mean, I have to say,
I bloody love him.
I do too, and I was worried because on the because he's got quite a sort of skew-if chin, and a lot of those telesnaps could lead you to believe it was quite a Gurney performance, I was slightly worried as to how he would be, because I think he's a great character, but great characters, in execution can sometimes not quite. So I was very relieved that actually that Evans, who's of course not in episode 1, so we didn't have him, is actually he's great. He's good fun.
Yeah, no, I love him.
I felt like he was put in there as a kind of misdirect. You're supposed to maybe think he's the intelligence, but then also you've got Chorley, you've got Anne Travers. There are so many suspects who could plausibly be the intelligence. I think
by the end, I was starting to think it was Jamie or Victoria.
The funny guy with the Beatles hairdo who's always banging on about stuff. One of these people. But I just feel it was a sort of unusually sophisticated structure, because normally, if there was going to be a reveal of who's the baddie, you'd have the obvious person and one other person it might be, if you're lucky. Whereas with this, you had 3 or 4 really viable kind of red herrings. Yeah. So it kept things ticking over brilliantly, I thought.
And we can't talk about proto-unit without mentioning a certain Alistair Gordon Lethbridge Stewart.
Oh, I thought you were going to go to John Levine. Oh, okay. We'll come back to John Levine. Okay, fine. Whatever.
You leave John alone. No,
he's
charismatic performance.
Well, and actually, I mean, you didn't mention him in the list of suspects, but I mean, it's very much set up that. Hang on, how did this guy survive? And he's
just suddenly turned up from nowhere,
and he seems a bit high-handed, and there is a lot of, which probably isn't helpful to us as viewers knowing what we now know, but if taken in isolation, he's probably at some point suspect
prime
number
candidate,
1, and he's great. He's got a brilliant bit when he comes back after everyone's been killed, and he sort of comes back and goes, nothing could stop it, shapeless, formless, and it's a really lovely piece of acting that he gets to do, and he's a great character. And what is also worth noting is that the guy that thinks he's in Chroma in the Three Doctors is the guy that when the Doctor says to him, "I've got this space-time machine that's shaped like a police box and it's in Covent Garden," and he goes, "All right, I totally believe you." Because it's as good an option as any, and he's very much the sort of tough soldier rather than the sort of blimpish figure.
He kicks ass in this story, doesn't he? He's a real action hero. Really.
The speed with which he climbs onto that box during the Covent Garden fight. I mean, I was stunned. He was so sprightly. Oh.
And what a shame that we don't have his first appearance, because Episode 3 went walkabout. But
although I don't buy the theory that Doctor Who fans live in such an insular world sometimes. Well, of course, they took that one because it was the Brigadier's first appearance. Yeah, right. Absolutely. There was somebody in the middle of Nigeria going, I think we'll take this one because this is the first appearance of course, it was Colonel then. And they go, oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, his mate's going, oh, has he got his swagger stick?
Yeah.
Toby, how dare you belittle Nigerian Doctor Who fans like that? They're just as nerdy about it as we are. But no, it does seem strange that you've got this entire cache of missing episodes. So rather than taking them all, they just take one. Doesn't really add up, but
they should have taken episode 3 of Enemy of the World, because we already had that.
Yes, exactly. Why couldn't they have done that?
That would have been balance in the Force. You see.
So they've tried to give us a version of episode 3. I've got the Blu-ray, and I think the transfer on that is absolutely stunning. Looks really incredible. What they've done with the existing footage is very good. I watched it on ITVX or BritBox or whatever you want to call it this time round, just because as we record this, it's part of the school holidays, so my access to the Blu-ray player is pretty much zero. So this time round, it was the Telesnap Recon, which I thought was really good. Not quite as high tech as some of the ones I've seen, but did you notice when they're walking back through, Jamie and Evans are walking back through the tube, and he wants to stop and buy himself a chocolate bar? Did you notice the wrapper on the chocolate bar?
Canfield's chocolate, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, Canfield's Dairy Milk.
Yeah, bless them. Yes. I often wonder, because on BritBox there's no context. They don't say, by the way, this one's made up entirely of photographs. So if people don't know, because people don't know, do you know what I mean? Somebody just go, oh, watch this old doctor. Why did they make this one when nobody moves?
It's a strange directorial decision.
And it was very strange for me because I'm watching these on American BritBox, which doesn't have a lot of stories. Like anything that's on the UK BritBox where it's got 5 out of 6 episodes, so they'll use a recon. They don't bother in the US. This is, I think, the first story that there's been that's included a recon episode.
Oh, really?
So that's kind of them, because otherwise I would have had to have found it in my iTunes library, and all my classic Doctor Who, it just listed it as episode 1, episode 1, episode 1, episode 1, episode 1.
Well, that's really helpful.
So I gave up. I tried to re-download them, and Apple said, no, you can't have those anymore. So so that was money well spent.
Oh, that's the benefit of physical media.
Well, now I know. Yes, I know that now.
Because I watch on BritBox because the shelf that my DVDs and Blu-rays on is at least 5 feet away, and I can't be arsed.
Get up and grab one. Can you not train Bernard to go and grab one for you?
He could actually. He does. He's an assistance dog, so he does go and get things. But
do you think, in terms of selecting episodes, he'd be better or worse than a Nigerian Doctor Who fan?
Oh well, yeah, probably. Here you go, Dad. Of course, yes.
Oh, I think that's going in the trailer. Okay.
Because it makes me sound like a big racist. So
exactly, it's a win-win. Oh, yeah. I mean, the fact that you're married to a lady of colour is neither here nor there. You're still a massive racist, obviously.
Oh, clearly, yes, clearly.
Yeah. Anyway, where were we? Well, I suppose we haven't even touched on, well, just in a roundabout way, the recovery. Obviously, Toby, I'm not expecting you to break any confidences or anything like that, but you do obviously have connections around the DVD and Blu-ray side of things. So did you hear whisperings way before they became available?
Yeah, because it was not a good year for me. I was getting divorced, and so I ended up staying for a long time at a friend of mine's house, who very kindly took me in, who also just happens to be the person who tarts up the pictures. So actually, for a while, unbeknownst to me, because they're proper professional people, unbeknownst to me, I was in the same house as these episodes without knowing it. So I had an inkling of what was going on. But I mean, but also a lot of the things that we all thought, I thought as well. You know, I was as prone to the Omni rumor as
the Omni
anybody
rumor
else.
now,
you know,
yeah.
but I knew once it was all coming out about Web and Enemy. I was I think it's fair to say I was slightly ahead of the curve.
And in terms of the Omni rumor, were you fully believing that we were going to get a massive haul back, or did that really?
I was there with you. Part of me sort of still does. I mean, it's sort of how I spend a lot of my empty brain time, is to, I'm sure some people fantasize about winning Oscars. I fantasize about going to a car boot sale, and I'll go, so okay, you find 12 films, but they can't all be from one story. So what do you know? And that's how I sort of entertain myself.
Well, it still allows you to get all of Dalek's master plan and still have a few episodes left.
I wouldn't get all of the Dalek's master plan. The Dennis Spooner episodes in the middle can fuck off.
Whoa!
Of all the stories, Toby, you've made an enemy of our genial host, Mr. Cockram. You've
Toby,
said
it's been
no
lovely
to
having you
Daleks.
on, and let's just wind this up now.
You've gone wading in.
It's my fault for bringing it up.
I'd certainly get the first one and the last two.
Oh yeah.
Of master plan, but no, that what volcano where you're yelling at each other on the planet, and the Doctor basically goes, "I did a thing," and you go, "Oh, thanks." But yeah, I'm a sucker for a missing episode rumor, and I've spent far too long on forums, following every turn of because somebody heard somebody say this and somebody that, I think, I still harbour a hope that there's some more out there, but
it's been a long time now, hasn't it?
Yeah.
So I think we're due one.
Yeah.
If anyone out there has,
come on, everyone.
Got a few film cans
That's an
knocking
idea,
around.
because I don't know if anyone's ever tried this, but if we make some kind of announcement that we'd like them back, maybe people around the world would be like, "Oh yeah, I've got something knocking around in the garage. I'll send that back to the BBC." Yeah. But yeah, as time goes on, I found it strange because if it was me, if I was in charge of, I guess it would have been Worldwide that was responsible for putting them on sale. If everything had come back, I'd be like, right, let's start putting it out in big chunks. Hence, you get 2 stories straight away. But if that was all they had, and clearly it was, you think, well, why wouldn't they put one of them out and then hold the other one for maybe a year down the line, or just space them out a bit? It seems cruel in retrospect.
I don't know. I mean, then you'd have people like me getting very cross because I couldn't have whichever story they decided to hold
if they
back.
just released Enemy of the World and said we've got Web of Fear, but you're gonna have to wait till next
We're not
year.
going to release it for a while.
Let's be like, hang on, we're not getting any younger.
I guess not. I guess there's no right way and no wrong way. But
I think the thing to do is not say we've got an announcement at midnight, and then it turns out to be something like a new font or
yes.
or class
or class
or a photograph of it. Oh, you're both very mean. I was going to suggest the photograph of a couple of pairs of shoes. Do you remember that one? That was another classic one.
I don't remember that one. What was that?
Yeah, when they were shooting Day of the Doctor, they had a photo of David and Matt's shoes.
Oh.
Their feet kind of resting on top of a table.
Oh,
and that was
sort of broke.
that was considered newsworthy.
My favourite one is the one where when they announced Stephen Fry and Lenny Henry, and they're both in a sort of cupboard.
Oh my goodness!
And this light flicks on. It looks like they've been held hostage.
And they both look so awkward as well. It's like, oh,
they haven't even ironed the sheet
come on, I
behind
just
them
want to be on
either.
Doctor
It's
Who.
just like.
This isn't what I wanted. Hush, Tish and Vibble. Let me go.
Well, what I would suggest is if you've got any interest in the missing episodes, dear listeners, you should check out our friend Tim over at the Missing Episodes podcast. They do such an amazing job of going over all of the details of what went where and when, and trying to figure out, the likelihood of things coming back. And it's a really
It's
good
excellent. There's a two-parter out just now, isn't there? Which pretty much drills down on all of that, and I found that very instructive, and a sort of one-stop shop to iron out any kinks in what one's worldview of the state of the missing episodes and the rumour and everything else. They've done a great job on that. Yeah.
Getting back to Web of Fear, because I suppose we all really ought to. There have been some fairly mean things said about the animation for episode 3. I don't think it's all that bad. I think I don't know whether people get this impression that the BBC has got this massive budget, sort of Disney-style budget to spend on animation, and it's going to look some sort of astounding 3D visuals.
It goes to show how clueless I am, because I obviously saw it early because I did the commentary on it for the Blu-ray.
Yeah.
And it was a different style, it was motion capture, and so you've got that very naturalistic movement, and talking to the guys that did it, it's quite a complex process, and they worked really hard on it and did a good job. And I enjoyed the commentary track of that as well, and I sort of fed off their enthusiasm. And I came out of that going, I'm really looking forward to what people make of this, because it's a bit different, and I love some of the lighting on it, and the PO and the way that the lens flare and all of that sort of stuff, which I thought was really interesting and nicely done. And so then I went on the forums when it came out, and I was like, I had not anticipated that there would be such sort of either fury or disdain, depending on who was dispensing it. And I was quite surprised, because I thought it was an interesting way of doing it a little bit differently, and merging more with, because unlike some of the others, and people make this mistake. Like, I remember, a few people said, well, why have they done Faceless Ones 1 and 3? Because the animations aren't generally plugging a gap. The animations are standalone productions to that's what they're commissioned for. They're not there to fill a gap in your collection. They are commercial products to be distributed worldwide and exist as whole stories for people that don't want to watch a single episode of something that the rest of it doesn't exist or whatever. Whereas this Web of Fear one was there to plug a gap. So therefore the motion capture stuff, I think was, it was deemed that was a good one to do it on, because it's got to merge with the surrounding live action episodes. And I think it's a good way of doing it. But I'm aware I'm in the minority with that.
I think it's a technology that they can make improvements as they go along, but the capture seems to be the thing that really gets the, I don't know, it's got a more of a realistic image that you get on the screen compared to what you're seeing from the existing episodes, rather than something that looks very much like a flat
animation. You get a more fluid and naturalistic movement.
Yeah, and I'm sure as technology goes on and things improve, you can use that technology and then remap it and put more impressive looking graphics over the top of it, if that's what's upsetting people. But I mean, again, I'm not expecting you to break any confidences or anything, but there are rumours that after a while it looked as though the animations were done and dusted, and now it looks as though that might not be the case. I don't think there's been any official. Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of privy to that. As I say, I was in a house where the missing episodes were, and I was still getting all my missing episode information from my mates down the pub without knowing that I was then going to spend the night in the room next to where the Web of Fear was. So that's a sign of how good the guys are at keeping a lid on stuff. Yeah. I mean, I haven't really spoken. I wonder how, because I'm sure I'd come back pissed every now and again and go, I've heard this. And go, you're right, whatever. But with the animation, with the releases, because I do the commentaries, they're done so close to release. Even if they are being done right now, I still wouldn't know. Because there's no need to tell me, in the sense that I wouldn't need to be in the loop. And that's assuming I would be doing another set of commentaries anyway. I don't take that for granted either. So I've heard the same rumours as you. I hope so, because I like missing episodes and I like them being able to watch them. Well, so much care and love has gone into making these collection box sets that it would be a real shame if we didn't have something approaching the full set by the time they finish releasing them. Especially seasons 3 and 4, to have a sort of... Season 3 is going to be the commercially viable set. You have to have episodes that people can watch. I mean, because season 4 has been hugely animated, of course, but it's there's no full story in existence from season 4, is there?
So,
Oh God, you're expecting me to use my brain now. Yeah,
it
you did it
occurs
last
to
The
me-
closest we've got is 10th Planet, but that's missing episode 4.
Yes.
So there's no
Yeah,
there's no whole story from season 4. So commercially, that's an odd prospect. I wonder how those ones will, how they're thinking about those ones.
So it occurs to me, could they ask ChatGPT to animate them? I mean, that wouldn't cost much, and that would be presumably commercially viable if it doesn't cost too much to animate them.
Yeah, what could go wrong?
Right. I remember I watched an animation, a sort of fan animation of, I think it was the Savages.
Oh, that's right.
With this dodo that was really sexy. It was like watching Lara Croft. And I thought, well, she's not normally like this, but I'll go with it. And yeah, it was the best thing until Victoria decided to dress up in her Pocahontas costume for some reason.
I think she was just trying to get with the groovy 60s fashion.
Is that what it was? Because while I really liked her plan to leave a trail by abandoning bits of her clothing along the way when she was dragged away by the Yetis, which is not a euphemism, the problem with that was that once you'd taken off the necklace, she had approximately 3 pieces of clothing left and 2 shoes, if we're being generous.
Yeah.
So... If it was more than 5 stations away they were taking her, she'd have spent episode 6 very cold indeed, and I was concerned. But luckily, that wasn't a problem.
Yes. Let's get off that whole nest of vipers, shall we? What did we make of the chance to meet up with Professor Travers again? I thought that was a really nice element to this story. It's very rare you get to see a character they've met earlier that season, and now you've got that juxtaposition that they're still the same age that they were when they first met, and he's obviously a lot older. I think that was a nice touch.
He was the Maisie Williams of the 60s.
But it's a proper character actor's performance as well, which I like. Is that I kind of forget that it's Jack Watling under heavy makeup and doing sort of old man acting, because he's so good at it. I mean, he was a really good TV actor. There's a reason he was so successful in the 60s, and if you watch him in anything like The Power Game or The Playmakers, he's a very good and naturalistic TV actor who got a lot of work.
Yeah.
And he gets the chance to have fun. He's been Travers in Abominable Snowmen, and as you say, a couple of stories later. And it's kind of my image of Travers is actually as of the older version rather than the younger, because I think the first time I ever saw Jack Watling in anything, he was an older man, so I was thinking of him as being older. But of course, so then you look back on that and you go, but no, he's actually it's a performance under heavy disguise. So I think he does a terrific job, and I think it's a performance that's perhaps not talked about as much as it should be, because one, well, it's always it's Deborah Watling's dad, and two, it's Travers. But I think it's terrific, and I love the way he is with Harold Chorley in episode 1. He goes, well, you an actor or something, television, never watch it. And he's great. He's really good, and then he does the intelligence stuff very well as well. So top work, Jack Watling.
Yeah, because not mentioning any 7th Doctor stories where people get possessed, but it could have gone very differently.
Because
Ian's looking aghast.
Well, so no. First of all, I went Curse of Fenric, which was quite a good bit of possession.
No, I mean Richard Price.
I suddenly, for some reason, that wasn't the first place my mind went. I don't know what's wrong with me. Bad fan, but
no, I did the same. I went Fenric first. I thought, don't be mean about Dinsdale Landon, and then thought, that was Richard Price.
That was one of the performances of the age. That was, but yeah, Bryce.
No, I think he's great in this. Anne, bless her, they're trying their best to sort of make her a bit more. She's not just there for the dads, as you used to get in a lot of the 60s and 70s. I think she's got a bit of intelligence about her.
Well, I remember being furious with that documentary Resistance is Useless, where they showed the clip of Captain Knight going, "What's a girl like you doing in a job like this?" And the whole reason that scene is there is for her to slap down the stupid blokes. But shown out of context, it looks like if you have to alter history to make your point's wrong. Young furious me is getting.
Toby, I get the impression you don't like that particular documentary.
No, it makes me very cross. Makes me very cross.
I remember at the time just being quite narked that, I mean, I didn't need to be told I was a sad nerd that wore an anorak. I knew that already, but
Yeah,
to
he's
have
actually
someone, you know, and it wasn't
He's
the
a friend of
actor's
mine on
fault who
Facebook
got-
now, actually,
obviously he
Steve.
was-
I
Okay.
keep meaning to message. He asked me to be, because we've got a lot of mutual friends because we're both comics. But part of me wants to say, I bet no Doctor Who podcast ever interviewed the anorak from Resistance is Useless, and I feel like I'm the man to do it.
Wow. Yes, make it happen, Toby.
I'm sure there must be a big Finnish box set about it.
But no, that documentary annoyed me because, well, one, I don't like anything that you know, that propensity we have to mock something that's a success when we could. If you haven't made a success, I think you should be a bit more deferent to a success. But particularly as it was a success that was a thing I loved that everyone thought was rubbish, and then the people that made it just before a repeat season are going, look at this load of old rubbish.
Yeah.
It was a painful time, wasn't it? It was like the BBC weren't really treating us with the love and respect that they would subsequently treat us with, as you say, class. The shoe announcement and the
It wasn't even
the marvellous way
not being treated with love and respect. It was being treated with sort of disdain and condescension. That I find really So anyway, let's not get bogged down in my fury at.
Turning it into a positive, one thing I've taken away from your podcast, because I listen to your podcast and I think it's fantastic, and everyone should listen to it. I felt like I had a slightly kindred spirit there, because there have been certain times where I've been incredibly serious about Doctor Who and I want everyone to like it, and I get really cross if people think it's a load of old nonsense. And I've kind of like disassociated myself with certain stories because I thought they were just a bit silly. And I've had like a complete 360 on a particular story. I won't mention it again because I mention it every 5 minutes. But yeah, you get those times where you know, as a kid, you're spellbound by a story. Then when you're a teenager, you want everyone to take you seriously. So you tend to sort of, downplay it. And then by the time you get to our slightly older age, you tend to not really give a stuff what people think, and you just like what you like.
It's a lovely place to be. It's also I'm finding myself liking things. I wouldn't have to do this with Web of Fear anyway, because it's my kind of image of a Doctor Who story. But I'm finding myself charmed by a lot of Doctor Who on its own terms. So I've always thought the Romans was fine, but actually last time I watched it, I absolutely adored it because I was watching the Romans as the Romans intended itself to be watched, rather than watching the Romans as somebody that likes Doctor Who stories about, soldiers blowing things up or whatever. And I found myself being charmed by 60s Who, being much more won over by the post season 7 Pertwee stuff, because season 7 Pertwee was the one for me because it was serious and gritty and all of that. And actually, I've had a great time with the Sea Devils recently, and some of those, and Curse of Blood, which were all stories I liked. I did not, but they were never, they were always fine. But I love it. I sort of love it all now. And stories that I hated at the time, which was basically anything present.
I'm going to say Mark of the
anything
Rani.
Present.
Not Mark of the Rani. Time
of the Rani. I mean, is still probably.
Yes.
Is it my least favourite? I don't know. But I hated the Happiness Patrol, and I love that now.
Yes.
And also, and I see people getting so cross on Twitter, and I sort of think, and I can't be disdainful of that, because I know how cross and how serious
I've
taken it, and it is so nice to be the other side of that and go, well, what somebody else thinks, if I think they're wrong, that's fine. It doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. But we are riding high because Doctor Who is safe, and Doctor Who is liked, and Doctor Who is, has survived and weathered the storm, and it's back in the sort of public consciousness, and it's not as precarious as I think of people who lived in the shadow of the hiatus, where Doctor Who's very survival was hanging in the balance. Oh God, I was touchy. Yeah, absolutely. It's quite nice.
So you must have been thrilled when we had the Trial of a Time Lord.
Well, gosh, those were
thank God that happened, or the show might have been in trouble.
Those were hard times.
But I was about, I don't know, 9 or 10 when that went out, and I thought Trial of a Time Lord was the best thing ever.
Yeah.
And I still think the Valeyard was one of the best things ever. So, people are always going to respond to different bits and different eras and different Doctors, and one man's good and another one's bad, and everyone's going to like everything, and no one's going to hate the same story apart from the Twin Dilemma, now I come to think about it. So, yeah.
Well, I think we've got a while before we come to that one, so maybe you'll reappraise it when we come to it.
I won't, but one thing I did want to pick up on, there's a scene in, I think it's part 6, where they've walked from Covent Garden, they're going towards Charing Cross, and they bump into, I don't know, staff or the Professor or someone, and he says, the Yeti are that way, and they've got Victoria. And JB points and goes, I'm going to Victoria. And I'm thinking, well, no, because that's the Piccadilly line. You want to be going that way to Victoria. So what sort of lesson was that for our children?
Well, there are probably children still down there now because of Doctor Who.
All looking like staff by the end, covered in soot and plasters and blinking and yes. But no, it was for a very, controlled and confined and claustrophobic story. A few good sets, 20 metres of convincing tube tunnel and platform, whatever. It would have been more like 10 foot, wouldn't it, altogether, the whole set? But they did such an astounding job of it that I think this is one of those rare six-parters that doesn't at any point feel like you're watching a six-parter.
I think it's great, and I know there's been a tendency because everybody, the received wisdom was The Enemy of the World wasn't very good, and Web of Fear was a classic. So when they came back, I mean, I always thought Enemy of the World was underrated, so I was happy to sort of champion it. And now I'm slightly irked because people who thought it was rubbish were very pleasantly surprised. Now there's a kind of vibe of actually Enemy of the World's better than The Web of Fear. I don't think it is. I think it was a more pleasant surprise. I think The Web of Fear is a much better production story. I mean, it dares you to find it ridiculous because it's Yetis with Web in the underground for no actual good reason. But it doesn't matter because it's done so convincingly. It's so well characterised. It's such a solid production, and it's such a good and exciting Doctor Who adventure. It doesn't matter that its very concept is batshit, because actually that's Doctor Who is always daring you to go, this is ridiculous, and actually when they play it so straight, and yet it's not played entirely straight because Troughton is so funny, but it just skirts it and judges it so wonderfully. But isn't it in episode 5 where Travers is possessed, and at the very beginning he says, I'll come back in 20 minutes, and you actually go, I think he's given it slightly longer than 20 minutes. That's the episode.
And also, what's the Great Intelligence doing for 20 minutes? Like, it's going to go around the corner and get some Marlboro lights and just have a couple of fags and look at its watch.
Well, you could smoke down in the tube in those days.
You could. Yeah. Well, I mean, you still can if no one's looking. Certainly at Russell Square.
Maybe he was restocking the dairy milk.
And we haven't mentioned the web itself, because when it came back, that could have been one of the issues, because there's not much web in episode 1. But the mixture of the mouldy slide and the foam, and there's a couple of beautiful little model shots of the foam in the tunnels. And my favourite one is the end of episode 5 when the foam bursts through the wall into the base, into the fortress. And I love that shot. And the little table gets over and because I much prefer model work to CGI. And I think it's beautiful. Yeah. And I think the whole web effect, and sometimes when they shoot through it, and you can see them outside, it's really eerie. And I think the bit where Staff, Sergeant Arnold, and Corporal Lane go in on the trolley, and Evans is on, and then you hear the screams and he pulls it back, and Corporal Lane's there and he's dead. It's extraordinary and it's great. And I love the web effect, which could have been Pony. It could have not worked at all, and it's sort of central to it. And they use various different ways of doing it that aren't necessarily compatible, but they join up together to be a whole that is totally satisfying, I think.
Is there any point wondering where the Yeti got these web guns from?
No.
I mean, was that always in the Great Intelligence?
It's all part of the upgrade.
Yeah, it's just whatever.
Yeah.
Got these. Yeah.
Now, some people might suggest that this whole season is effectively a very similar story playing out time after time after time. However, I think this particular story does it in a sufficiently different way that you're not kind of sat there thinking, oh, God, I saw this last week.
I think there's something about having contemporary-looking soldiers in fatigues that grounds it a bit, and especially as Douglas Camfield is so simpatico with that kind of, vibe. It also echoes a little bit, so Quatermass and the Pit, which anything that has the sort of modern military investigating something has a very Quatermass and the Pity vibe, which is not a bad thing to evoke of all if you're going to evoke anything.
And also for the viewer at home, I would suggest that very few of them have been to like remote polar ice cap bases, whereas everyone's been on the tube. So it's not like you're watching a base under siege. You're watching somewhere and somewhere you've been, and there are soldiers, and it's for me, it absolutely shattered the paradigm of Series 5 by being exactly the paradigm of Series 5.
And also, I love a base under siege anyway. I love we always watch the Poseidon Adventure at Christmas, which is, you get a disparate group of characters, and part of the sort of perverse fun is working out who's going to die and how they're going to die, either heroically or not. And, and if you throw a traitor into the midst of that as well, that's kind of, that boils it down to essence of sort of Doctor Who storytelling. And I'm afraid I could watch, I love all of those season 5 stories. With Wheel in Space has issues, but it's not because it's of the nature of the people being confined. It's just not very good for a number of reasons. But I think the base under siege model is one I find perfectly entertaining, even though it happens time and time again. Those are the target books that I enjoyed the most.
Yeah. Do we have anything else we want to say before we wrap things
stop
up and give
music.
it a score?
Boom! How gorgeous is it?
Oh yes, there's an elephant in the room here, isn't there? We're gonna have to talk about it because
the cyber theme. Yeah.
Space adventure. Yeah,
but the
it gets to run
Bartok
out
stuff
again,
in
doesn't it?
episode 1, and I remember being so amazed when I watched The Shining.
So good.
And I was like, "That's the music from the Web of Fear."
Yeah.
So The Shining's canon.
Hey, Kubrick was watching Doctor Who at this time. We know that.
And I mean, I mocked the museum that has lots of that is decked out like a castle, but that opening horror film scene, that shot
so
on
filmic.
film, with all those candles and that gorgeous set and the smashed glass and that rumbling Bartok score. It's a phenomenally mounted sequence, which is essentially, that bit in episode 1 where that guy gets killed, which is such a familiar Doctor Who moment. And Douglas Camfield goes, well, I'm gonna basically, I know it's a museum, but I'm gonna put it in a scary castle, and it's terrific.
I think we've noticed even in Abominable Snowmen, it feels like, I know it's that story was a holdover from the last season, but it does feel like they've really upped their game with particularly the filming side of things. It just looks that bit more expensive. It looks more like you can see the money on the screen, I think, anyway.
Well, Camfield was always
compared to the previous
I don't know if it's the directors or somebody spending the money better, but I mean, I think it looks brilliant. And what I hadn't expected and it always surprises me when I watch episode 6, because you can't really see it from the telesnaps, it suddenly gets very sort of big and white, and that final set that they're in seems like it's quite high. Having had these sort of quite confined areas, you're suddenly in an area that's really white, and it's really smoky, and it's really high, and it just gives, when you might be getting fatigue from the visuals, it just gives it another look. And it's also quite atmospheric as well, but in a slightly different way. But Camfield is very good at atmosphere, which is quite a difficult thing to quantify because it's slightly nebulous, but there's something about what he does that makes things a bit more oppressive, a bit more tense, a bit more, and it's great story. He's got a great aptitude for the sort of atmosphere that Doctor Who needs, that makes it feel slightly more exciting and scary.
I think it's just that winning combination, isn't it? You've got a really top-notch director, it's a really good cast, and a cracking story, and they all just come together to make a real classic. Iain, any last thoughts?
You know me, Mark. I'm not known for having thoughts, so I'm going to recuse myself.
Okay, well, in that case, I think we should... I don't know if you're able to do this, Toby, but would you care to mark it out of 10? Some people have a problem with ranking
I'm happy
stories,
to do it, and I'm slightly better as I get older with giving top marks, because I'd always go, but that bit's not quite right there. But I think Web of Fear has been, since we did Running Through Corridors, actually, I've always liked it, but it's been a 10 out of 10 for me, and it coming back did nothing to alter that. So it is a big fat 10 out of 10 for me for the Web of Fear.
Marvellous. Iain?
So I was thinking about giving it an 8, and then I'm thinking, well, is it on a level with Enemy, or is it better? And then you think, no, but it's a classic, and it's got the Brigadier in it, although he's not a Brigadier yet. He's the pre-Brigadier. It would be churlish to give this anything less than a 10, and I would fling myself off the balcony in guilt and shame if I were to give this less than that. So, 10.
Well, particularly after you gave the Underwater Menace a 10.
But I really liked the Underwater Menace. It was jolly.
And that's fine.
It is
We're
fine.
Broadchurch.
Yeah. Broadchurch was a 2 out of 10. I thought it was very... Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm going to echo all of your sentiments. It's a fantastic story,
Yes.
and it's got to be 10 out of 10. Wonderful. Okay, so that's what we thought of The Web of Fear, and it's time to find out what you guys think of this story.
I've got mail.
Okay, so let's get into what you guys think of this story. So first up from me on Twitter is Multiple Frood. Betty knows where his towel is, and they say, great stuff. The scene in the museum is wonderful and would be the perfect audience-grabbing opening. But annoyingly, we have to wait for them to tie up the ending from Enemy first, a story that ends far too abruptly and would have benefited from these scenes at the climax. Yes, I think that is a very fair point. I think we did broach that at the start of the podcast. Thank you for that. And we've also heard from Willow Turner. And they say, really love it. Great reveal of the mole. Also, love the random Cyberman music. See, so not everyone gets tetchy about it when they use space adventure. Thank you. Next up, we've heard from Aid Rickson. Aid Rickson says, only read the novel, but in my opinion, the Yeti are well overdue rebooting in a similar kind of setting for the new series. How about that, Toby? Would you like to see him come back?
Yes, I suppose. I mean, yes, but probably more for just the frisson of going, I'm in touch with something from my youth, rather than because anything they possess. I mean, they're just, they're killer bears, aren't they, basically?
Yeah. It would be nice, though. Okay. Next up, we've heard from Dieter K. And Dieter says, one of my fave Target reads, and certainly one of the best scene setters episodes via episode 1. In its almost complete form, an enjoyable story, but it never quite lives up to the promise that episode 1 foreshadows. Yet some great scenes in episode 6 make up for a bit of the lag in the middle. 7 out of 10. Well, it's not for everyone. Next up, we've heard from David Kesson. And David says, I loved this from the day in the 70s when I read the old Target novelisation. I was absolutely thrilled when it turned out they'd found most of the episodes. Thank you, David. And we've also heard from Pietro Rossi. We're getting a lot of new feedbackers, so thank you for getting in touch. Pietro says, strong, well-written, directed story. Very atmospheric. Being black and white helped give the menace in the shadows. The subplot of an unidentified traitor within gave it an extra frisson. Good to see the Brigadier for the first time. The London Underground sets are excellent. Oh, I can't disagree with any of that. I think you've absolutely hit the nail on the head there. Next up, we've heard from Robin Hood Bold Outlaw. And they say, wonderful, looks glorious. My favourite bit is Anne Travers's "So I Became a Scientist" bit. Yes.
Yes.
That's a great moment. Next up, we have heard from The Stylish One. And they say, my favourite classic Who story. What strikes me is the atmosphere and pacing are perfect. The side cast are brilliant as they're memorable but enjoyable. You're suspicious as a viewer, but no character acts ridiculously shifty. You understand why each character acts the way they do. Even the Doctor and the companions are written in a way where you understand why the other characters don't trust them. If you view the main TARDIS trio as side characters, they're just as suspicious. It works on so many levels and is wonderfully written. Thank you, that's great. Some really good points there. We have also heard from Homer. No, not that one. The first Target novel I read as a child, loved it. That creeping threat of the web, the traitor in the camp, and the second Doctor, a very different character to Tom, who was the Doctor at the time. When it was recovered, it didn't disappoint. One of my favourites. Thank you for that. Nick Goodman has gotten in touch, and Nick says, one of Troughton's finest, genuinely scary and claustrophobic. The underground setting is inspired. Thank you, Nick. Matt Pott has responded on Twitter. Great story, shame about the animation being so awful. Well, I mean, you can't please everyone, can you? Yeah. I don't think anyone sets out to make a bad product. So, you know, we give them the benefit of the doubt. I think they did their best with what they had. I think it's pretty good. Next up, we've heard from the delightful Fraser Gregory.
Yay!
And yeah, we love Fraser. Fraser says, the ultimate in 60s style, with an atmosphere so thick you could cut it with a knife. A proto-unit story, with Haisman and Lincoln showing how to bring a monster back in a new and interesting way. Quite rightly thought of as a classic, thanks to Camfield and the TARDIS team. Wonderful. Thank you, Fraser. Always so positive. Okay, next up we have heard from Richard Smith from the Something Who podcast.
Yay.
And Richard says, yay! We'll just have Toby saying yay to all of our beautiful podcast friends. No, it's a great show. You should check it out if you haven't heard it. Richard says, in fact, you'll be hearing more of Richard this season on the show, but anyway, we'll get back to his feedback. Richard says, in 1976, I went on holiday to France for a fortnight with 2 Target books, one of which was The Web of Fear. I must have read it 4 or 5 times, and for so many years afterwards, it occupied a place in mind as the archetypal Troughton story, up against impossible odds. It's the triumph of ingenuity and making something out of very little, but also over rising tension and creeping paranoia as there's someone in the camp who can't be trusted, and nowhere is entirely safe. It made for a great read for an 8-year-old, and a good watch 40 years later. It took me a long time to see episode 1, not until the early 2000s, and I eagerly followed the rumours of it having been found in 2007 and again in 2013. In the end, nothing could quite live up to the pictures in my head, but episode 4 comes close, with the unstoppable Yeti. Thank you, Richard. That was great. We have heard from one of our Anthony Carrolls. We have 2 Anthony Carrolls, and they're both amazing. They always give really good feedback. So our first Anthony Carroll says, simple to describe, brilliant. Perfect base Under Siege story with satisfactory death count. Episode 4 is one of the best in the show's history. 9 out of 10. He does go on to say he never gives anything a 10 out of 10, so I think this is about as the best we can expect from Anthony. So thank you, Anthony. Next up, we've heard from 26 Glorious Years. And they say, I recall avidly watching episode 1 when it was shown as one of the BSB Doctor Who Weekend Yeti rarities. To my mind, it ranked amongst the most perfect examples of 60s Doctor Who I'd seen. 30 years later, it's still on that pedestal, closely followed by its successors, particularly episode 4. Thank you very much. And our next bit of feedback is from Hudson Media. And they say, one of, if not the first Troughton I watched when it got released on iTunes. Loved it then, love it now. I adore the eerie atmosphere and brilliant setting. An example of a real classic Doctor Who story. Thank you very much. And lastly from me, we've got our other Anthony Carroll. So Anthony says, I first saw episode 1 on Lost in Time when I was 11. Oh God, that makes me feel old. Anyway, carrying on. I adored the heightened 40s dramatic opening and was ecstatic to finally see the next episode 5 years later, only to then face another gap for the one after that. It's another absolute classic of the Season 5 monster era, but is another prime example of how useless a companion Victoria is. At least Adric could do a bit of maths. Her only party trick is lung-bursting screams. Well, yeah, I suppose that is a fair point. But they use that to quite great effect later down the line, but we shan't spoil that.
I have heard from John at Porridge on Twitter, who says, bleeping electronic globes, I want one now. Dear Derek Pollitt as Driver Evans, and Lethbridge Stewart, absolutely marvellous. Julian Botting says, it's my favourite story, it has everything, and I loves it. Nicholas Headley says, a strong classic, well written, directed and acted. I was so happy when most of it came back. A true gem. Anna, the secret poet, who goes by the name of Anna, the secret poet, so that's not the best kept secret, says, I'm a sucker for anything set in subway tunnels, so I'm sold right away. I remember being genuinely surprised at the end reveal. Michael Herbert, MJ Herbert on Twitter, says, dark, claustrophobic, a classic. And 42 to Doomsday say this, along with Enemy of the World, were the highlights of the 50th anniversary. No telesnaps or audiobooks or soundtracks could capture Canfield's excellent direction. It's still a joy that when episode 1 finishes, episode 2 is available to watch. Deb Jones says, I loved the reintroduction of Professor Travers, having aged, but Victoria and Jamie are still the same. Revisiting him brought home the time travel idea better than any others I can think of. Count Wibbly, who has one of the finest names I've ever seen on Twitter, says it's a masterpiece. Episode 1 is probably the best looking single episode of all Who. The remaining episodes have very few flaws. It all looks and sounds incredible with a very strong cast. The only flaw is that it's a bit long for such a claustrophobic story, but that's the only flaw. Nigel Horsler says good story, atmospheric, and the Yeti look a bit scarier than before. Also, lots of fun trying to guess who's been taken over by the Great Intelligence. Most important of all, the Brig makes his debut. Jonathan says, when the missing episodes were returned, I was so excited to finally see them. They did not disappoint. A great cast and some strong characters. Setting the story in a familiar location really draws you in. Making it somewhat contemporary helps too. It is still a classic for me. Braden Smith says the Yeti aren't exactly intimidating by modern standards, but Web of Fear was an enjoyable story, and it gave us Alistair Gordon Lethbridge Stewart, so that's a bonus. Straight Out of Gallifrey says the pacing, guest characters, the mood, everything, just like that. And we've heard from RetroTube, who says it's surprisingly gripping, surprisingly tense, and surprisingly brutal. The episode where most of the cast get wiped out, including likeable Sergeant Knight, is astounding, and the whodunit mostly actually works, even though the culprit is actually under mind control, which dilutes the reveal somewhat. If I'd been on the show this week, it would have been full marks from me. Evil of the bloomin' Daleks, I ask you. So I think we can guess which member of the RetroTube team that was. But then we've heard from Dave Kitchen, who says, I have nothing new to add to all the comments. It's great, it's atmospheric, the episode 4 battle is amazing, and he's, this is confusing, he's done initials, but Lieutenant Colonel Lethbridge Stewart losing his shit is hard to watch. So I'll just say you guys are great as well, and keep up the excellent work. Thank you, David. The peanut M&M is in the post. Nathan Bottomley has sent us one of his uniquely I want to say tiresome messages where he says, when they start playing Space Adventure during the Yeti battle, it feels like the show no longer gives a shit whether the villains are space lizards, space robots, or whatever the hell the Yeti are. I love you, Nathan. I love you. Adrian Berry says, as with others, the Target book first, then the audio CDs. Enjoyed it when I finally saw it. If only I had this to then have my first underground experience instead of American Werewolf in London. I don't know, I'd say that was a pretty good introduction to that. SJQ says, looks and sounds great, but it's still just another base under siege with Troughton on holiday for a week. Yes, I did notice that. And finally, Jason Jason, who is at Doctor Who Novels on Twitter, said episode 4 is one of the 5 best individual Who episodes of the 1960s. So kind of agreeing with Toby there. The slow burn massacre of everyone in the guest cast and then Travers coming back as a villain at the cliffhanger was stunning even before we got the video back. The novelisation botched this, but Captain Turner's death works much better in live action than in print. Further proof, not that any was needed, of Douglas Camfield's godlike level status as director.
Before we head over to Toby, we're going to have some audio from our dear friend Andy Moore.
Henry, Merv, lovely to see you again. What, Chuck? Hello. Plug yourselves down and let's discuss your sequel to The Abominable Snowmen. Abominable. Yeah! Hello there. Listen, I'm sorry about this, but quite a bit of this one's missing. And the reason is I went outside to do some tweeting about Chibnall and Whittaker. Oh, and to say Lawrence Fox should be the Doctor. And, I have a go at Emily Cook for not doing tweet-alongs to stories that I like. And when I went back in, the tapes were missing and the recording studio manager was driving off in a Porsche. Anyway, this is what's left. Yeah! What a load of bollocks.
Well, there we are. I do wonder whether we're going to get sued over this one, so I'd just like to state for the record, Toby had nothing to do with this, so please don't sue him if you are listening.
I mean, or me. Or me, it's your show, so just focus all your litigation.
Oh, it's mine. Okay,
sure, when we're in legal shit, it's your show. I am off like a whippet.
Okay, I can supply Andy Moore's email address if you would like to get in touch and sue.
The criminal Andy Moore.
No, that was very, very funny. Thank you, Andy. Toby, who have you heard from?
Firstly, I have heard from Philip Edney, who says, whoever gets to review this with you, I am jealous of. I'm sure when you heard my voice, you went, the jealousy has now dissipated. There's nothing to be jealous of there. Philip says, I first encountered The Web of Fear as my first Target novel when I was 10. I had watched a couple of Tom Baker stories and bought this book and devoured it on a Saturday afternoon, then read it again on the Sunday. From this moment on, Patrick Troughton was my favourite Doctor. The first episode, when I got hold of it, I watched over and over again. This was black and white brilliance. The opening scene is terrifying. And you have a TARDIS. Oh, and then you have a TARDIS out of control. And Victoria and Jamie are so great. Then 10 years or so back, getting to watch the whole show almost. It was everything it was reported as being. The battles were epic. The web terrifying, the soldiers all had personalities, and Troughton sublime. This is a 10 out of 10 in every regard. I agree with you, Philip. Then we have Hugh Dennis, who says, I'm a bit jealous of Hugh. Lovely to see this again after so many years. The Yeti, the glowing web, and the tunnels scared me as a 5-year-old. In 1968, Hugh's seen Fury from the Deep. I remember the BBC One trailer with Patrick Troughton talking to camera about the Yeti being scarier this time before leaving hurriedly at the sound of a roar. That's right. It's one of the specially made trailers that they had.
I don't think they've done that before, had they?
Yes, there's a trailer for the Ice Warriors with Peter Barkworth and Peter Sallis talking to camera. Peter Parker's going, I'm Leader Clinton, I'm obstinate, and Peter Sellers going, I think he says, the name's Elric Penley, which I always thought was quite cool.
Penley, Elric Penley.
Yeah. And he goes, I don't like, I'm going to underline the subtext of the story you're going to see next week. Michael G. Clark says, there really should have been more stories with Anne Travers as the science advisor. I don't even know if she was considered for the Pertwee stories. But no, I don't think. I don't think that's kind of how it worked. She's great. I had the pleasure, of course, of consorting with Tina Packer via Zoom because she's in America, and she's a sharp lady. I liked her a lot. Smart cookie, and still working in Shakespeare over in the States. Victor Bruno says, one of my all-time favourites. It was a Brill story. Lethbridge Stewart and Unit became part of canon. The London Underground sets and the mood were terrific. I remember Pat doing a promo at the end of the previous story saying it was a bit frightening and have a grown-up around. Gosh, people are remembering that trailer, aren't they?
Yeah.
I wonder when you did the Ice Wars, did anyone... I remember Peter Sallis and Peter Parker
Not a thing.
having a chat.
No.
Jeff the Wheezing Grampus says, I love it. It's beautiful, atmospheric and haunting. Using space adventure as a catch-all monster theme totally vexes me, though. It's for the Cybermen, damn it. It's a bit like if you watch Pathfinders in Space, having loved the music used for Quatermass and the Pit, and it somehow cheapens it when it's on another science fiction thing that's got kids in it. You go, don't do that. This next one is Taran Woodbeast. Bonkers and enthralling, 10 out of 10 direction, performances and storytelling, changed the direction of the show and paved the way for Unit. And then we have Michael at Big Orange Michael. Still wish episode 3 was in the archives. There's a Doctor Who fan for you. It's fascinating to watch the series reinvent itself a bit here with the introduction of Unit. It helps that it's a solid story from a solid season of the show. I mean, gosh, I don't know about you boys, but I remember when this was a season that we only had 4 episodes of.
Yes.
DJ Alpha T says, another example of a magnificent story as far as the novelization is concerned. Brilliant first step, but sadly not as mythic as its reputation. But what a target. Genuinely creepy reading as an under 10. Oh, so DJ Alpha 10 is one of... DJ Alpha T is slightly underwhelmed by seeing the actual... here's a yay from me for Lucy McCall.
Yay.
The opening segment is awful. I am, in my opinion, says Lucy. I do love the rest of it, though. Anne saying, so I became a scientist, not know exactly who the intelligence is using, yet is on the tube, and last but definitely not least, Colonel Lethbridge Stewart. So the bit she doesn't like, Lucy, is really the enemy of the world, isn't it?
Yeah. And she loves the brig.
Well, quite right. The Crinoid Podcast, yay, says...
Hey, Jim.
Great performances, staggeringly good sets, a genuinely oppressive atmosphere, improved Yeti, an intriguing mystery, and Lethbridge Stewart's debut. I should like it more than I do.
Oh, what's a backhanded compliment?
Yeah, So the love is dissipating a little bit. This one is from Simon Hart, who says, I think episode 4 is one of the single greatest episodes of Doctor Who ever. Quite right, Simon. From Troughton being magical and mysterious as he describes the Great Intelligence, through to the broken Lethbridge Stewart after the Covent Garden battle and Knight's death. It's incredible. Yes, it is. It's a wonderful story that really did deserve the huge reputation it has. It's an effective, scary story full of atmosphere and wonderful characters. Anne Travers is superb. Yay! Yes. I also think, something we do in the show, I think Doctor Who has boffed Anne Travers in between episodes 3 and 4. But you just look at the way they interact with each other. They've gone from being... I think something's clearly gone on in a cupboard. You just watch the way they interact with each other.
He was a bit of a rascal, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah, and the way he's hanging on to Victoria at the start of episode 1, goodness me.
Yeah, naughty Doctor Who.
Very naughty. But there you go, it's the 1960s. It was a very different time. Thank you all so much for your feedback. It's wonderful to hear from you. And thank you to Toby for reading it all out as well. You stuck in there and you didn't give up.
Well, thanks for asking me to.
So before we say our goodbyes, we are going to do some recommendations.
Oh, lovely.
And I'm going to start with Iain first. What would you like to recommend for our listeners?
So, well, normally I would mention some kind of literary novel that has just come out, but all I've been reading for the last 100 years is the Virgin New Adventures and the Eighth Doctor books for my side hustle. So I have no books to speak of at all. What I will say, and this obviously by the time this podcast goes out won't be a news flash to anyone, but the new Lana Del Rey album is easily the best thing she's ever done. So if you're ever in need of a tunnel under Ocean Boulevard, this is the record for you.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll add that into the show notes. I am going to recommend a book, but because my attention span is so appalling, I have listened to the audio version of it. It's quite a sobering listen, but a really, really good book. It's called Strong Female Character, and it's by Fern Brady, who is a stand-up comic who I'm sure Toby...
I know Fern. I've worked with her loads.
Yes, it's a really, in some ways, quite distressing book because it talks about her experiences as being someone with autism who over many, many years failed to get diagnosed, even though she was convinced that she had autism. And it's a recounting of her early life growing up in Scotland. And it's not to say it's a completely depressing listen. There are some moments of very dark humour in there as well. But it left me realising I knew absolutely nothing about autism whatsoever. And I feel like if it's done anything at all, it's helped me to get my head around at least the tip of the iceberg of what people are experiencing. So it's a really good book, and I think everyone should either read it or have a listen to the audio. Toby, what would you like to recommend for us?
The Best of Blue Oyster Cult.
Oh, yes,
which
one
is
of your all-time favourites.
and Pink Floyd live in 1988 or whatever.
That's the Pulse tour, yeah.
Well, I mean, this is probably slightly out of date, but the two programs I've enjoyed most in the past 12 months that haven't been, well, apart from Succession, which is magnificent, are Slow Horses and Bad Sisters, both of which I thought were terrific. So I just mentioned them as an aside, but I think a book that I think a lot of like-minded people would enjoy, but I got for a friend for Christmas and he'd never heard of it, and I know people of this parish would enjoy it if they availed themselves of it, and maybe it's not had the publicity it might have had, is Alvin Rakoff, who was Jacqueline Hill's husband, who's a Canadian television director, has written a book called I'm Just the Guy That Shouts Action, and it's I'm Just the Guy Who Shouts Action, and it's about he's written another one since as well, but this one is about, I mean, it's about a lot of aspects of making television during that time, but it centres around the making of Requiem for a Heavyweight, which is a now lost play in which he cast a young Sean Connery at the suggestion of his wife, Jacqueline Hill. Yeah. So there's a lot about Jacqueline Hill in there, but there's a lot about the making of that programme. His recall is excellent of the events around the making of that particular production, but it's a good sort of first-hand account of making a production at around that time, with the added joy that it's got as a central figure in it. If you didn't already love her, you'll love her even more. Jacqueline Hill. How
could you not love Jacqueline Hill?
Yeah, she's absolutely magnificent, and she we know her as Barbara Wright. We don't have much of her as her, and she sort of comes alive a little in this book, and it's a nicely written book, and it's not too heavy, and it's and as I say, I gave it to a friend for Christmas. He said I'd never even heard of this, and I thought it was a great read. I sort of read it in a couple of sittings, really. So yeah, I'm Just the Guy Who Calls Action by Alvin Rakoff.
Oh, fantastic!
While you were telling us about that, I googled it, and the first thing that comes up, it says Alvin Rakoff dating history. Like, some people say he was in the 70s, some people say it was the 80s, the whole Mordred Undead thing. I don't know what that's about, but that's a genuine link. That looks fascinating. I'll get a copy
it's great.
of that. No, I'm trying to persuade the listeners, but, let's all get a copy of that.
That's brilliant. Well, before you go, Toby, I'd just like to firstly say thank you so much for coming on and being a guest. It was tremendous fun.
Thank you for asking me.
So, Toby, you have a wonderful podcast of your own. Please tell our listeners all about it.
Well, I'm delighted that there are two Anthony Carrolls, because I know they've both been listeners to my thing, and it took me a while to work out. I thought, is this poor guy, registered twice or whatever? No, it's two. There's the two Anthony Carrolls. Yeah. So hello, both Anthony Carrolls. I started doing a Patreon thing over lockdown because we couldn't be furloughed and we're both self-employed and blah blah blah. And I thought I'd just do what everybody else was doing. And I came up with 3 Doctor Who podcasts. So I do one called Happy Times and Places, which is a Doctor Who commentary podcast, but I have a guest who sort of records their bit separately and chooses their favourite things about a story, and I have to do a commentary, but I have to accentuate the positive.
Yes.
So sometimes that's easier than others, and I sprinkle it with hopefully facts and observations, but a general sort of upbeatedness, just because it's so easy when we all do it to sort of fall back into snarking, and I don't think it behoves us so to do. So it's a conscious decision, and as I say, I'm not saying I am any better than anybody else. It's sometimes it's a real effort to do it, but I think it's much more rewarding and invigorating to try to do that. And sometimes I suspect it's quite funny hearing me squirm when I'm struggling. But also it's very nice having somebody else come in, because each guest has a different vibe.
Yes.
And I sort of feed off their enthusiasm for things that I might not have picked up on. And it's amazing how... and actually then I get correspondence as well, which is really interesting, of somebody who might say, oh no, what about that? And you go, God, I've watched this story 20 times, and all it takes is for me to talk out loud about it and somebody else to come in and make me sort of really rethink it. And it just shows the how rewarding it is to revisit this stuff. I also do one called Too Much Information, which is the sort of the York notes on each episode of Doctor Who, and I foolishly thought I'd be doing one of these a month. They take quite a lot of work. And oh my god, but people seem to like them. They've got very good music, and it's basically everything you need to know of the sort of production diary, analysis, and then a couple of biographies of people from the episodes.
I think what potential listeners need to know is that it's not like me and Iain. We're a couple of chances who just wing it on a podcast. You do an awful lot of research. You like to know everything before you.
Well, yes, I don't want somebody to write in and go, I think you'll find. So no, I have been looking through. I just thought, well, I'll just collate what's in the books, and then a couple of things, I thought, oh, I'm not sure about. So I've gone back to the paperwork, and unfortunately, the paperwork for season 1 is not in order, so it's just a big mess. Yeah. So it took forever. And they don't have all the production files, but yeah. So I've sort of gone back to source. And made
doing
it
the Lord's work,
difficult for myself. I think the Lord made waterfalls and things. I've made a biography of the man who played the rider from Shang Tu, but we didn't know anything about him until that. So I'm pleased. Yeah. So I've sort of disappeared down rabbit holes. And then there's one. My favourite one is one called Indefinable Magic, which are basically sort of extended monologues where I try and be funny. I try and be amusing, but looking at an aspect of everything from when carrots feature in Doctor Who to what it was like having Doctor Who a celebration when it came out. There's another one that's all about cliffhangers, and I've just done one that's all about that I'm very pleased with and took a lot of work about disability representation in Doctor Who, but that all takes the form of hopefully a comic monologue. It's sometimes the subject is serious, but I try and always be. It's always an attempt to be sort of entertaining and amusing rather than a lecture. And they're just, I suppose I sort of say it's what Radio 4 would be doing if Radio 4 made very obscure hour-long monologues about Doctor Who. So yeah, that's what I started doing during lockdown, and I've sort of carried on. And I have a Patreon, but I also put everything out later anyway.
Yes.
It's still a sort of free at the point of contact if you want it to be. And I'm also, as we speak, I've broken off today to do this, writing a book that has taken me over 30 years, and I'm nearly at the end of, about Quatermass, that will hopefully be out in the next few months, and has been a labour of love. And if you like Quatermass, I hope you'll like the book. I found out lots of interesting stuff and dug through all sorts of archives, and I have interviews and letters with people long dead, and pictures sent to me by the designers and things like that. And if you don't know Quatermass, it's a useful introduction to why it's such a magnificent science fiction phenomenon.
Wonderful. Well, by the time we get around to actually getting this episode out, you can probably go to your local bookstore or retailer of your choice and purchase a copy.
Hope so.
Yeah. Well, that's wonderful. Thank you so much, Toby. It's been a real blast having you on the show. And, well...
We love you.
Well, thank
we
you.
love you. You're amazing.
Thank you very much for
do.
having me.
You're a national treasure.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
If you'd like to get in touch, you can email us at mailbagofrassilon@gmail.com. We're also on Twitter @TimeEndSpacePod, and you can also find us on Facebook. If you want to leave some audio feedback, there is a link in the show notes. You can use your phone or your computer and leave up to 60 seconds of feedback, or if you're listening via the Anchor website, you can click on the message button and leave your audio. We'd love to hear from you. And thank you to Momo Tempo for providing our theme music. And we'll be back next time. What are we doing next time?
Is it Fury?
I think it's Fury.
It's Fury.
It's Fury. It's Fury.
That was the first story I knew the whole cast of without having, off the top of that I could recite the whole cast of. It's a very special place in my heart.
I can't even remember the name of the show, let alone the cast. Oh, dear.
Yeah, but often, Mark, you can't remember what your name is or where you live.